Good afternoon. I'm Mark Allen with Gaper.io, and I'm here today with Jim Franklin, a former CEA at multiple venture-backed firms. Good afternoon, Jim. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me in to have a chat, Mark.
Yeah, thanks for joining us today. So can you share a brief background of yourself and your work experience?
You bet. Did an accounting undergrad and then did a JD MBA program. I learned about venture capital, and I thought it would be awesome to have a career in venture capital. And I ended up on the management side of actually managing venture-backed companies rather than being an investor. And over the course of 20-some years, I've been a founder and a VP of sales and a CFO. Ended up being a CEO at a couple of different companies, one of which was acquired by Oracle. And so I had some experience seeing how Oracle ran a business that had 80,000 employees, of which 40% were remote back then. But I really focused on early stage companies, sort of like 10 to 100 employees, and really have seen an evolution from what I call the one office concept. We really have everyone in one place to, now teams are starting distributed and scaling distributed. Most recently, CEO of SendGrid, we had 2 offices between California and Colorado, and then we have remote employees in there. We scaled to 250 people in about 4 years. So wow. It was very quick and exciting growth. Ended up going public, then being acquired by Twilio. And Twilio has really been becoming the telecommunications infrastructure for cloud computing and building a fantastic business. Now I'm a professor at our local university here at the University of Colorado. Serve on a number of venture boards for companies and a limited partner. I think that entrepreneurs, when you had an exit, you should contribute 10% of your net proceeds back into the ecosystem from which you came in the form of either donations to ecosystem type activities like Boulder Startup Week or those sorts of things, or through angel investing. So you put some money into startups. Little money goes a long ways. They really appreciate it. Although I think that's more philanthropy than investing. You should expect an economic return. Or then lastly is a limited partner. And so my wife and I are limited partners in probably 8 of the venture funds around Colorado. And so then the general partner does the work of making investments in startups. But we stay very active in hearing pitches and helping frame that conversation. So it's a good way to pay it forward. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about the value of remote work.
Sounds great. Well, on that note, what is your experience with remote employment, both as an employee and an employer and a venture? Well, you've done,
my thinking until very recently has been very much opposed to remote employment, and really big fan of the one office solution. When you're in a startup, it's like your first 10 people being in the same place is super important, and really encourage people really through like Employee 100. If you can be in the same office, that really helps the communication. When I was a founder, we scaled to 55 people in like 3 months, and we were all on the same floor, and yet we couldn't stay on the same page. Because we'd have engineering doing something that marketing didn't know about. And it's just, even on the same floor of a building that wasn't very big, it was hard to do that communication. The reality of the last, 5-7 years is, that's not the way of the future. In that, especially millennials and younger generations are expecting to have much more flexibility and working from home and having a really kind of going where the talent is. Because it is a big limiter to say, oh, you've got to move to one of our offices if I really want to have people scale. And so now I've been part of companies as an investor that have been virtual from day one. And so SendGrid, where I was the CEO, really started with about 8 people that were all over the place, from Southern California to Portland, New York, Germany, Poland, and the Philippines. Because they all met in the cloud and just collaborated and did things and didn't really think about geography as even a dimension to the business. And so we did end up opening offices and scaling the business, but we had primary offices. And I found that to make remote work happen, the ideal situation, I think if you work together for 6 months and then go remote, no problem. And if you have like a quarterly cadence of seeing each other, no problem. With SendGrid, we had 2 offices, and we became somewhat famous for having an offsite all hands meeting in Cancun, Mexico. And people think, Cancun, that sounds like a crazy thing to do. But the reality was we needed a neutral spot that wasn't the California office, which was sort of technical, and it wasn't the Boulder office, which was sort of businessy, but we needed neutral ground that was sort of midway, and it's actually frankly cheap to fly to Cancun from LA or Denver and just get an all-inclusive resort and have some structure to it. And my goal was that people would learn that their coworkers, were honest and hardworking and well-intentioned. And when you then go remote, and you're either back in like one of our offices in Rhode Island and other places up in Portland, but when you were using electronic means to communicate with your coworkers, you tend to lose sight that they're honest, hardworking, and well-intentioned. And by getting together that once a year and give them a blue shirt, whatever, and say, okay, here's the big goal, team, and that would really that would help. But we were hiring so many people, that 6 months later, half the team hadn't been to our big kickoff, and they would you could just feel the skepticism, kind of come in between, Hip Chat or Slack or whatever it is that you're using to stay in connection. So I think that I call it jet fuel and alcohol is the glue that binds these remote teams together. I'm an investor in a company that is split between Boulder and Sydney. And so their globally low-cost center to have their annual offsite is Hawaii. So we don't say that. It's
not very cheap, though.
Well, but it is if you're flying between Sydney and Denver. It's like they're short flights. And, they go in whatever the off-season Hawaii is. But February, I think probably any time is a good place to go. But you can stay in reasonable. Just getting everyone, that cadence for once a year is a huge accelerator for the business. Even though the cost of those kinds of trips can seem expensive in a smaller mid-sized company, it's really 1, 2, or 3 FTEs. You're not hiring, say, in that future year, but your employee base, whether it's 30 people or 100 people or whatever, having them all focused and together, it really helps. Yeah. So to scale, you got to figure out the remote thing. Even at Oracle, they were 40% remote with 80,000 employees. And so that's a lot of employees. They're just going to cheap, right? Maximizing margins. You don't have to warehouse, feed, and heat and cool, network, all this stuff that we're learning. And certainly now with post-pandemic land, I think we've just gone through a huge shift, and it's just going to accelerate this change that's been happening for 5 years. Where I know a number of companies aren't going back to their office; they just don't see the value in it. I think if you're Series B or later, sort of in that 50 to 100 people or later, you've got some product market fit. And you have something of a bit of a mature process, I think you can get away with that. Yeah. I think if you're in your first 50 employees, just the whole innovation thing, it'll be interesting to see how Facebook and Apple and some companies, if they can do innovation remotely, or they really need to bring people back, into the box and get all that, unintended, constant interactions that create things that you can't predict.
Yeah, so. Interesting. You mentioned Apple. I actually have a friend who started the interview process at Apple post-COVID. She had 12 interviews that were all remote. She got offered a job, and she started today.
Wow.
And she's at home. She's never met the people she works for.
So I think it's a very interesting challenge for the employer is to how do you make that person feel welcome? Right. I hope I can imagine we have a real ritual around onboarding employees. So I think in the tech community, we're horrible at this. And so I was very fortunate to have some good leaders at SendGrid in our people ops group that were very good at this. And I would think in a remote situation, it's like, sending them the t-shirt, the lap, just making it all, some delighters in there from like Six Sigma concept things, like things they weren't expecting, whether it's, little mugs or something, or things they can share with their spouse or kids who are all going to be part of their remote learning experience. And to make it work. So it doesn't feel like, oh, it's Monday, I now work for Apple. It's like, well, do I have the uniform, right? Or like, just how do you do that? So I struggle with that. The university class, I'm kicking that off in August, and I think it's going to be fully remote. And how to make these students feel like, hey, because I think the value in the business school is it's the peers, right? You're going to be going through life with a set of peers that you went through this class with, and you need to stay in touch with each other. And so it starts now. So hopefully we'll do some in person. So otherwise I want to send them shirts, right? And do an onboarding kit just like they were employees and say, welcome to CUVC 2020 hashtag, I guess hashtag the first thing, but yeah, so designing a shirt for them for the first day.
Yeah.
I don't think that'll fly with the university policy, but we'll figure it out.
Yeah. Interesting. So yeah, I was actually planning to call my friend after 5 o'clock today. I want to bother her on her first day. Although she's probably, she's not at an office, so she probably could, but I'm still going to just wait.
Knock her door. Hey, you busy?
Well, no, I have to, she's about 5 miles from me, so I have to I'll just text her.
Yeah, I mean, the virtual door. Like,
the virtual door.
Office, you never get anything done because it's a constant stream of like, hey, you got a second? It's like,
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, now that once you've been interrupted, you have a second.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, we've all been there. So since we're talking about remote employment, what do you think is the future of remote employment? Since it does seem to be, on an upswing now.
Well, yeah, I think this is a trend that was already sort of leaning pretty solidly towards remote employment. And it's just, it has taken off. So you need to get good at it. And I think one of the key lessons is when you're having a meeting is have everyone at the same cadence. And what I mean by cadence, so if you have 6 people in a conference room in one location, and then you have 6 people dialing into to that meeting, the cadence in that room operates at a certain
right.
But when you're dialing in, there's just that bit of a lag, and and the humor doesn't work, and it's tricky. So if you're the leader and you're in that the in-person part, right, then you need to, I guess, not do that, right? Just have everyone dial in is one approach. I think in theory that's the best idea, although I've never done that. But I try to take the meeting that's happening in real time, live, and I will pause it, and then I will say, "Hey, California, what do you think?" Right? And so California people, just to kind of hold the floor and to slow down the in-person cadence, so that the people who are on other technologies can participate, especially if their personality styles are not like mine. I don't mind speaking up and interrupting other people, even virtually. But many people really you just need the pause button, especially engineers, I would say by stereotype, and you need to kind of say, with a great ops person in California, Dana, what do you think? And tell all the Jim Franklin's world to shut up and sit down for a minute, and then get that out. So that's getting on that cadence is great. Working together in person at some point. As we said, if you could do it for 6 months and then go remote, awesome. But I've seen people do as little as maybe 2 weeks. So when you're first hired, it's like, hey, come to headquarters, go through the boot camps and the onboarding and all that, and then you have those coffee conversations and the happy hour conversations and all that, and then go remote is very helpful. I think of a cadence of once a quarter would be ideal. If you have a remote sales team, getting together for your quarterly kickoff where you congratulate people for everyone hitting their quota or President's Club or whatever it is. And you go do it once a year. You do 3 fully remote kickoff sessions. It's just a good I think cadence to check in with people to keep things on the same path. We talk about engineering in particular. If you're trying to run products and you're doing full remote, it's like if you have people in the same time zone working on the same product, so you don't split Europe and US on the same product, because that doesn't split well. But if you're between the US and Colombia, no problem, right? You're especially in Denver, we cover the central time zones well. You have a lot of overlap if you're sort of running up and down time zones. Just thinking about how you divide that work.
Yeah, brilliant. So, the current pandemic has caused many companies to go remote. Have you noticed any roadblocks or challenges with some of the companies you've formerly worked that they experienced as a result of this?
It's just remote work roadblocks versus pandemic. So it's like lack of trust. That sense that I think video helps, but having been the CEO of an email company, email lacks tonality. And so when you get that email, your frame of reference or how you receive that message can be completely different than what that person sent.
Yes.
And the opportunities for miscommunication are many and vast. And so by being sort of fully remote all the time, it's like, how do you get underneath that and recognize that the person on the other side really is smart, hardworking, and well-intentioned, and reinforcing that point. So I think that once you have that that break in trust, or that skepticism, especially just pro tip: 5 hardest words in business. How hard can it be? Right. And so when I had I was in Colorado and the founders were in California, and we're gonna have 2 offices. I thought, how hard can it be? Right. It's like, well, when you have business people in one office and tech people in another office, right? We know tech people think about business people like waste of food, and then the business people are like, tech people, what do you do all day, right? You sit around with your arms folded looking at your computer, right? It's like, sure, you can't code through your elbows, right? I think we need some hands on keyboard here, right?
Yes.
And that's just sort of plays out between marketing and sales, right? Marketing thinks their leads are all great, and sales thinks they all suck, right? And so there's just some natural tensions in a business. And so, being fully remote and having that lack of trust just sort of opens some of those wounds. So then it takes some extraordinary measures to try and bring people together when you can, to get them back on the same page before it starts to drift again.
Yeah, and that goes back to your earlier point about if you have 2 different offices, bringing them to a neutral site, because if one office goes to the other office, the office that's
enemy
home,
territory,
right? And they're home, so yeah, they have a little bit of a home territory, right? But they also have their normal life to live. They still go home to their families, right? Where the group that's traveling, they go to a hotel.
Yeah, you need everyone to sort of shift their perspective, right? Even if you are in Colorado and you're in Denver, there's a little resort just at the very edge of town. It's right in the foothills, and just literally like elevating your perspective. And you don't commute downtown to your office. It's like, oh, I'm going to a different place. We're gonna go up there. It's like basically like a quarterly offsite. It's like you're in a different pattern. It's like, oh yeah, we're gonna be here for a few days, and it just gets you out of that that home routine and the same way of doing things. Certainly this whole hiring situation and onboarding people and performance reviews. I mean, obviously a lot of terminations have happened over the last 6-8 weeks, and letting people go remotely is just super hard. I think collaboration around hard questions. If you have a management team and you've got 3, 5, 7 people, something like that, and like you need to get together in a conference room with a whiteboard over a period of time. You need to have breaks where you step away and defuse the situation when people get heated about things, which oddly enough in business, people care a lot about certain topics, right?
They do.
They get angry about things, and you need to okay, it's just, and how you do that remotely, I think is an unsolved issue yet. And so I look at some of the management teams and the companies I'm involved with, and it's like, if you just sort of like, we have your annual plan, it's like, kind of do Q1, do Q2. It's like, but when it comes to be, July, August, September, and that team's really thinking about the 2021 plan and what are the big trade-offs, and should we, stop doing this business and start going in this direction? It's like, we call those movie meetings, right? And it's like, how do you get that, 2 to 4 hours in the afternoon, with, and just kind of hash through things to come up with a decision where everyone could participate, the weigh-in, buy-in thing, hear the voices heard, the objections, and all that stuff, and then have people, commit to the future and say, hey, let's go do that. And if if you're all at home wearing your jammies, and it's just not quite the same as there's a process. We can do a podcast on that about how do you make hard decisions in a business, and it's not a 1-hour call on schedule for sure. It's so I think it's part of the art of a business, and for sure CEOs dealing with shareholders and board members and trying to get a sense for what's going on in their world. Are they going to continue to fund your business? And those conversations don't happen in groups, right? So you can't say it in front of someone else, because they'll say, of course we love you guys, and but my partners, they might not let me, right? So like, how do you hear, like, what's the real objection? I think in an enterprise sales process, same thing. It's to be very challenging, right, to really hear the unstated objection versus a Zoom call, whatever. But if you do the 3 cups of tea with somebody and you're in their home turf in San Francisco or whatever, and whether it's tea or wine or whatever, but you want to develop those relationships. So I think that some of the best employees I've had, especially based here in Colorado and Denver, is you have to create relationships over the phone. We have a good airport, you can travel, but it's just like, being in a middle time zone, if you can create relationships with the phone, that's an incredibly valuable skill. And hiring for that can, I think, really help save your sales process. and that's an art into itself. I'm definitely better in person. And I think that I hire people who show well, and they're good, and they're good in front of a crowd. They're good one-on-one with a key buyer. People that they just seem trustworthy when you meet them. It's sort of a mojo we interview for. And so those kind of people you don't want to have at home, and you don't want them in the office. Right, we said United Hertz and Hilton, right? Just like get out there, and because you're spreading good in the world, I know that's creating leads and opportunity for partnerships and investment and sales and all that stuff. And it's like that. It'll be interesting to see how people can overcome the less in-person interactions.
And it's going to be interesting too. To see how this all shakes out, because we still don't know when we're really going to be able to travel in major group, and if we're even going to be comfortable, right? I don't know what it's going to be like in 6 months, if I'm going to be like nervous about getting on an airplane and staying at a hotel.
Yeah, I think here we are on June 1st, and I think we all have collective fatigue, and we're shifting some knobs and doing some things differently, and we'll see. I think the science and history show us there'll be a second wave, and likely be worse than the first wave. And how we react to that second wave will be an interesting effect. It makes planning tricky. So we definitely have talked to our portfolio companies about making sure the cash you have lasts through the end of 2021. Ooh. So really looking at 18 to 24 months.
Yeah.
And so that's why there's been a lot of layoffs, despite the PPP and other things, because you really need to make that money last. Because if there's a second wave, you don't understand the second and third order effects of that about your customers. If they're part of the 40 million unemployed people, they're not going to be writing checks to your customers, who then won't write checks to you, right? Just trying to think through all that is very hard. And so just getting defensive in the short run by maximizing sort of cash retention to create options and opportunity as we go forward through the next 1 to 18 months to sort out what the new normal becomes.
So finally, there are companies like Gaper that help develop, build, and scale products, especially for startups, but also for established companies. How important do you think setups like this are going to be going forward for companies that need to hire specific talents, and they need to hire them in a hurry, because that is going to come again?
Yeah, so definitely used remote workforces to help scale companies. As you're scaling from, let's say, classically that 10 to 100 people, it can be very hard to go out and interview and hire people one at a time. Your skill sets might not be around interviewing. If you're under 10 employees, you probably don't have a good people operations group with recruiters and people that can train managers and come up with that whole process. And then hiring in teams. If you need a group of fintech coders to build a fintech application, well, that's hard for you to go do. But there are teams like that exist. If you can just plug into a team, that can be very powerful. Classically, people think about cost. Oh, it's 1/3 cheaper, do it overseas. I have found that to either be not the case or just not the point. In having developers and other people in different parts of the world, one, it helps us provide better local support. When we compete against Amazon successfully with essentially a commodity product in email, but we charged 3 times the price because we were better at support. And a keystone to our support was having 24/7 phone, chat, and email, which was split between California and Romania. The Romania daytime sort of was the Colorado, California evening to morning. And so we could run a global support organization that really wowed our customers. And then they didn't mind paying more than the Amazon price because they got a lot more. So when they had a problem with their infrastructure, they had someone they could call who English first speaker, knowledgeable, computer science person, and likely had been a founder in their own background. So having geography can be a key strategic piece, as well as just bulk. It can be hard to hire in certain jurisdictions like Seattle and San Francisco, of course, but it's gotten a lot harder even in Denver and Austin, some of these other jurisdictions where all the talent spot up, and then the big players from the West Coast come to Denver and open up an office and hire 300 people. They don't hire them from Denver. They import them from Minneapolis and Midwestern cities, Omaha or Kansas City, and then that's for becoming aggregation points. So those people then are now spitting out into the startup ecosystem. But that's a long and challenging process to pull people out of companies that have pay scales that are not consistent with startup culture and what investors are willing to fund when you're not yet found product market fit.
Yeah. Well, actually, an interesting example of that is my daughter. My daughter was, she got her master's from Carnegie Mellon and comp sci, and she was going on to her PhD, and Google made her an offer she couldn't refuse. Google moved there just because of Carnegie Mellon.
So she had a job with Google in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, that's where she works.
Yeah, awesome.
And they have she had multiple companies make her offers in Pittsburgh, and they were big companies that you've heard, that you think of as being headquartered somewhere else. Google just made the best offer.
I think that's it's good for Pittsburgh, which we have an affinity for, of course, Steelers. But also, it's good for these big companies to reach out and put sort of centers of excellence in other places, and using Carnegie as an anchor for that makes a ton of sense.
Yes, it does. So, well, Jim, I want to thank you for your time today. This has been fascinating. It was nice to talk to someone that has a more broad view of all of this as opposed to just their own company. And I want to wish you a great day.
All right. Thank you very much. Great chatting with you.
Thanks. Bye.